Introduction to Structure and Function of the Human Body lecture. This lecture will go over the organization of the body and the anatomical positions and directions related to the body. It is really important for this learning plan and also for the rest of this course to pay particular attention to the definitions and have a good understanding, as this will set you up for success for the rest of this course. Introduction. So we have three terms here. We have anatomy, physiology, and pathology. Anatomy is the study of structure of an organism and its relationships of its parts. It is derived from a two-part word that means cutting apart. Physiology is the study of functions of living organisms and their parts. It is a dynamic science that requires active experimentation. And pathology is the scientific study of disease. Disease is the result of abnormalities in the body's structure or function that prevents the body from maintaining an internal stability that keeps us alive and healthy. That internal stability that keeps us alive and healthy is also called homeostasis. Structural levels of organization. So the organization is the most important characteristic of the body's structure. The body as a whole is a unit constructed of the following smaller units, and they are listed from smallest to largest. First, we have the atoms or molecules, which are at the chemical level. And then we have the next biggest level, which is cells, which are the small structural units in their organization of various chemicals. The existence of life depends on the proper levels and proportions of chemical substances in the cells. Tissue is the organization of similar cells working together to form a function. Organs is an organization of different tissues. And systems is the organization of many different types of organs all working together to have a similar outcome. Structural levels of organization in the human body are shown here. We have the atom and then a molecule, vesicle, a neuron, which then we get into the cellular level, which then creates a tissue level. And organ level is the next, and then you have the organ systems. The organ systems are split up into different systems. There's an integumentary system, skeletal system, muscular system, nervous system, endocrine system, cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system, and reproductive system. Anatomic position gives us reference to the position in which the body stands erect with feet slightly apart and arms at the sides with the palms turned forward. There are two terms to describe the body when it's not in an anatomical position, and we call the first one supine, which is when we are lying down facing up, and then we also have prone, which is lying down facing face down, so our back is to the top. Here's a picture of the anatomical position. The body is erect, arms are at the side with the palm facing forward, and head and feet are facing forward. Now we'll get into anatomical directions. Very important to know your anatomical directions throughout this course. So spend some time looking these over. Anatomical directions are used to describe relative position of body parts and relative position of disease processes. Superior means towards the head, upper, or above. Inferior means towards the feet, lower, or below. And some examples are the lungs are superior to the diaphragm, or the stomach is inferior to the diaphragm. The next two anatomical directions are anterior and posterior. Anterior is front or in front of. Posterior means back or in back of. So the nose is on the anterior surface of the body, so the front facing part of the body. The shoulder blade is on the posterior surface, so it is behind on the back side. Some more anatomical directions. We have medial and lateral. Medial meaning towards the midline of the structure, and lateral meaning away from the midline or towards the side of the structure. So the great toe is medial to the side of the foot. It's on the medial side of the foot. The little toe is on the lateral side of the foot, so towards the outside or away from the center line. Anatomical directions, we also have proximal and distal. Proximal is towards the nearest of the trunk or nearest point of origin of a structure, and distal is away from or farthest from the trunk or furthest from the structure's point of origin. So some examples would be the elbow is proximal to the wrist. The ankle is located distal to the knee, or the hand is at the distal end of the arm. These are all examples of proximal and distal. Anatomical directions, so we also have superficial and deep. Superficial meaning near the body surface, and deep meaning further away from the body surface. So the skin of the arm is superficial to the muscle, and an example of deep would be the bone is deep to the muscle that surrounds it. Planes and body sections. So sagittal plane and midsagittal plane are very similar. They both mean splitting the body into right and left sections. However, midsagittal means that it is an equal right and left halves, whereas the sagittal plane not necessarily an equal right and left half. So these two can also be called medial or median, so you might see that throughout this course. The frontal plane splits the person lengthwise, so it divides us into an anterior and posterior section, so a back section and a front section. And then the transverse plane splits us and divides us into upper and lower sections, typically at the waist. So those are the different planes that you will see. This picture here talks about all the directions and planes. So just to review, superior meaning towards the top, posterior meaning towards the back, anterior meaning towards the front, proximal meaning towards the site of origin, distal meaning further away from the site of origin, and inferior towards the bottom. Then we have the transverse plane, which splits us into upper and lower halves. The frontal plane, which splits us into a front half and a back half. Sagittal or medial plane cuts us into right and left halves. You will also see on here we have lateral towards the outside and medial towards the middle. Body cavities. We have two different body cavities. We have the ventral and the dorsal. The ventral consists of the thoracic and abdominopelvic regions and cavities. The dorsal consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The ventral cavity also has the mediastinum, which is the mid portion of the thoracic cavity, the heart and the trachea located in the mediastinum. And then we also have the pleural cavities, which contain the lungs, the right lung and then the left lung. Each have their own pleural cavity. So the thoracic cavity consists of lungs, heart, esophagus, and trachea. And the thoracic cavity is divided by or separated from the abdominopelvic region or cavity by the diaphragm. So here is a picture of the thoracic cavity. We have the mediastinum, which has the heart and trachea, and then we have the two pleural cavities for the lungs. It is separated by the diaphragm, and then we go into the abdominal cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity. The ventral cavity is then the abdominopelvic cavity, also has the abdominopelvic cavity. So the abdominal cavity contains the stomach, intestines, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and spleen. The pelvic cavity contains reproductive organs, urinary bladder, and the lowest part of the intestines. The abdominopelvic region can be split into 9 regions and 4 quadrants. Here's a picture of the quadrants and the regions of the abdominopelvic cavity. We have the right upper quadrant, often abbreviated RUQ, left upper quadrant, often abbreviated LUQ, and right lower quadrant and left lower quadrant. So one of the main organs in the right upper quadrant would be liver, and as you can see, the liver kind of extends into the left upper quadrant, but usually we assign them to the quadrant that they are mostly in. So even if there is a small portion of that organ in that quadrant, we don't consider that the main quadrant that they are present. So liver would be right upper quadrant, stomach would be left upper quadrant. You could say small intestines would be the left lower quadrant, and the large intestines, well, kind of covers all quadrants. But something that might be in the right lower quadrant would be something like the appendix. The other picture over here shows the 9 regions within the body system, and a lot of times most physicians and medical facilities are using the quadrant system versus the region system. Other body cavities, so we talked about the ventral cavity. Now we're going to talk about the dorsal cavity, which contains the cranial cavity, which has the brain only, and then the spinal cavity, which contains the spinal cord. Here's a table that summarizes all the different organs in the body system, and we also have an anterior view, which actually this is a transverse slice of a person, us looking down at it and what the organs look like. The axillary appendicular divisions of the body. So we have the axial region, which is the head, neck, and torso or trunk, and then the appendicular regions, which are the upper and lower extremities. So here is a picture. So our axial is anything on the trunk here. So basically our thoracic and abdominal pelvic regions that consists of the axial part. And then our appendicular divisions are our limbs, so our arms, and then also our legs. And this diagram also labels all the different parts and joints of the human body. Balance of body functions. So survival of an individual depends on the genes that make up the body and is of utmost importance. Everybody's got a little bit different makeup. Survival depends on maintenance and restoration of homeostasis, which is relative consistency of internal environment. The body uses negative feedback loops and then sometimes positive feedback loops. An example of a negative feedback loop would be us shivering to increase our temperature, and a positive feedback loop would be uterine contractions during birth. Feedback loops involve a sensor and a control center, and they then affect that body part in order to maintain homeostasis. Sorry. The body's internal environment, you can think of it as a bag, and it absorbs substances and excretes substances into the external environment. We have the respiratory system, which absorbs and excretes oxygen, so absorbs oxygen, brings oxygen into the respiratory system, which is then converted and transferred to the bloodstream where it can be transported to the cells. And it's transported by the cells to muscle and organs throughout the body. Then those organs and muscles then dispense back the carbon dioxide, and the cells then transport it through the bloodstream back to the lungs, and carbon dioxide is given back off into the external environment. We also have nutrients, salts, waters that come through our digestive system and are absorbed through our digestive system into the bloodstream, transported by cells to the muscle or organs that need the nutrients, and then are either absorbed or used for energy and are converted to ATP. And the other nutrients that are not used are then put back to the bloodstream, and they are either stored or they are given back to the digestive system or the urinary system to output all the organic wastes, or in either fecal matter or in urine. The balance of body functions. All organ function is to maintain homeostasis. The ability to maintain balance of body functions is related to age. The peak efficiency occurs during young adulthood and diminishes in efficiency during young adulthood. So our peak is usually in our late teens, early 20s.